So tonight's webinar is Emergency Preparedness and Response with a focus on hurricane preparedness. So my name is Penny Wyatt. I'm the Director of Parent Programs and External Relations for Division of Student Affairs. We're very happy that you've joined us tonight for this very important webinar. We want our students and their families to be as prepared as possible. So we are offering this webinar a few days before your students' hurricane evacuation plan is due. So we want to give you all the background that you need, and we'll save some time at the end for questions. So I'm so happy to introduce to you tonight our panelists, my very valued colleagues, Meredith Beers, who is the Associate Director for Business Continuity of Operations, and Donald Veals, who's the Assistant Director of Emergency Response Systems. So they are quite experienced, very valued here at Tulane. They've led us through the preparation and response to many different situations. We really couldn't do without them. So I'm very happy to introduce you to them. I will join you again at the end for the Q&A. And now I'll turn things over to Meredith Beers and Donald Veals.
Hi, good evening, everyone. We're so glad that you're here. As Penny said, my name is Meredith Beers, and I'm the Associate Director of Business Continuity at Tulane. This is I've been in my role for 4.5 years, but next fall will have been at Tulane for 20 years. I went to Tulane for my undergraduate, master's, and PhD. So I have a lot of institutional knowledge and love for this university and city. In my time at Tulane, as a student, I evacuated for 2 hurricanes, and with Donald, over the past 4 years, we have prepared for about a dozen storms that we were in the forecast cone for. So we have a lot of hurricane experience and are looking forward to sharing that with y'all.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Donald Veals. I'm the Assistant Director of Emergency Preparedness and Response. I've been here at Tulane for 6 years prior to Tulane University. I was in the Marines 6.5 years. As a Marine, I was a Marine security guard. So I guarded the embassy in Managua, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, also Stockholm, Sweden. I was actually doing emergency management before there was actually an emergency management program. I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. So we're the Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response. If you see Meredith and I in this wonderful picture, this was our post-evacuation for Ida. As you can see, we both wearing red, meaning, hey, you know what? It's time to get to work, because this is what we do every day. And basically, our department ensures that Tulane is prepared for any type of emergency. A lot of us look at our department and just think we only plan for hurricanes, but no. Any type of emergency that can happen on Tulane's properties, we basically have plans, we run exercises, and we just prepare for them. We want to know our capabilities before an incident actually happens. Next slide, Penny. So we have what's called the all hazards approach. I'm going to show my age here. Before, we always had a binder for active shooter, a binder for severe weather. But how we look at things, we look at things as an all hazards approach, because we utilize the same resources for all emergencies. So for a boil water advisory, we'll utilize that same water for shelter in place, or even for our evacuation, and sometimes for commencement. We definitely utilize our water supply. So today we're going to talk about hurricanes, which it is hurricane season now, June 1st through November 30th. So we're almost there. Although this slide says all hazard preparedness, I would like for you all to join us on Thursday evening, and we're going to go much further into detail with our other hazards that we definitely prepare for, including active shooter. Next slide, please. Next one. So hurricane communication, and you all may be wondering, how do we connect with you? And guess what? We don't. But there is a great emergency prep.tulane emergency updates for parents. If you all click this link, you will be opted into our parent messaging. This is something that Penny's department handles, where they will send out any updates to the parents. So definitely sign up for these updates. Also, if there is a long-term emergency, we do have our emergency website, which is emergency.tulane.edu. If you go to this website today, it's just going to show that Tulane is operating under normal conditions. But if we are preparing for a hurricane, you will start seeing communication on this website. So anything that we send to your students will most likely end up on this emergency website as well. Other ways, because you know our kids nowadays, they love social media. So we always ask them to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Tulane Emergency, and you as parents could definitely opt in as well. I'm just going to go ahead and throw this disclaimer. If you see something cool on any of those sites, it was me who put it up there. If it was kind of lame and boring, it was our student worker, okay? So don't tell her I said that. And then also we have something that's called Tulane Today. Definitely subscribe to it. They provide a lot of great information pertaining to Tulane University as well. Next slide. Other communication as well. Tulane assigned email, our emergency website, like we stated. Then we also have our mass notification system, which is EVERBRIDGE. So one thing about your student, let them know how we will communicate with them during an emergency. The primary source of receiving information will be their Tulane email address. That's going to be their primary way of receiving information from us. I'm going to talk about EVERBRIDGE in a few other slides, but EVERBRIDGE is definitely our mass notification system. And with EVERBRIDGE, we're able to text your student, email them, call them, text them as well. Anytime there is an emergency on campus outside of hurricanes. Next slide, Penny. Also, for your students that are living on campus, our housing residence life will also send your students updates. Our dining department will also communicate with your students. Once again, social media. Any time that we send anything out, the students must follow our directions pertaining to the university, including student affairs and Tulane Police Department. Our student affairs department and Tulane University Police Department, they work hand in hand. So if the student ever needs anything, please reach out to Tulane Police Department or either student affairs. Next slide, Penny. Have your student keep their information up to date. Our Gibson portal, only your student can log into this. I do apologize, parents can't log into it. So make sure they have up-to-date contact information, including their emergency contact as well. Because with our EVERBRIDGE mass notification system, this is where I pull their information from. So their name, their email address, their personal email address they could add to where they can actually receive email alerts from their personal email address and their telephone number. So if your student receives a new telephone number, have them update their telephone number within Gibson as well. Next slide. This is the EVERBRIDGE app. Have your student go to the Apple Play Store or the Google Play Store to download the EVERBRIDGE app. The EVERBRIDGE app have additional resources on it. They'll be able to receive push notifications from our EVERBRIDGE mass notification system to their EVERBRIDGE app. Then also it has a few other great functions on here as well. So safe corridor. So say, for example, your student is working late in the library and they're walking back to the dorm and they don't want a Tulane Police Department officer holding their hand as they're walking back to the dorm. So that student could basically go into safe corridor, set their timer for 10 minutes. Once they get to their destination, they will have to stop their timer. If they do not stop their timer, that's when all the fun starts. The chief of police, the deputy chief, the commanders of each district, uptown, downtown primate center, the supervisors on duty, myself, and the dispatch notification. That notification is going to show your student's name, their GPS location, and their telephone number. And with the GPS location, it's just like looking at a Google Earth map. So it'll show what building they're in, but it's not going to show what floor or which room they are actually located in. So once again, have your student use this. If they're walking around town late at night, they could use their EVERBRIDGE app wherever they are. Just know, if they don't stop their timer, they're going to have probably a police officer show up on their location, or our dispatch will definitely call them asking if everything is okay. We're not saying all these things to discourage your student from using it, because I'm going to tell you right now, the students love utilizing this app. Ask me how I know, because they utilize between 9:30 at night and 3:30 in the morning, because some of them forget to turn off their timer, but they definitely use it. Emergency call, I have Tulane Police Department emergency number programmed in their app. So if they want to call up Tulane Police Department, it's programmed in their phone, but I would definitely ask them to save Tulane Police Department number in their phone as a contact. And once they receive their university splash card, the number's on the back of their splash card too. And then we have SOS. SOS is big and red for a reason. You're practically saying, hey, I need help now. So same thing with Safe Corridor, the same features are going to go off, but there's one added feature. Once your phone goes into SOS mode, your front-facing camera will come on. That's an app, that's a function that they control within their settings. I don't control it in my settings. I don't sit back and say, oh, I wonder what my boss is doing, and tap into his phone. That's not what we do, not the CIA nor NSA. But your front-facing camera will come on, and it's going to show us a 2-minute video so we can see and hear what's going on. That could be something that is utilized in case of active shooter situation, or if there's someone where they can't speak, at least we could see and hear what's going on around the student. So once again, if your student download it, let them know if they press the red button, they're going to have about 3 seconds to cancel. If not, Donald Veals will laugh at them as I watch them panicking, trying to stop their video from home recording. Next slide. I'll pass over to Meredith at this time.
All right, so let's dive into the reason that we're all here tonight, hurricane preparedness. Next slide, please. So we are currently in hurricane season. It runs from June 1st to November 30th, and we are starting to approach the peak of the season, which is late August through most of September. So the Gulf waters are really starting to warm up, and things will potentially start getting more active for us. When a storm forms in the Atlantic Ocean, which Donald and I love because we can see it coming for at least a week before it's supposed to make landfall, especially if it's going to make landfall within the Gulf. So we love these storms that form way out in the Atlantic. What we don't love as much, but we've been seeing more of, are storms that form in the Gulf of Mexico. And with these, we get about 4 days notice between when they form and when they make landfall. So these our timeline for everything we do for preparing from the university standpoint gets accelerated. Our decision about, are we going to close and evacuate or close and shelter in place, that gets made as close as early as possible. We want to have as great and accurate of a forecast as possible, with still allowing families and students enough time to implement the plans that they want to implement, particularly if our decision is going to be to shelter in place. So we'll go on to the next slide, please. So with hurricanes, we have a lot of hazards. There's going to be high winds, storm surge, heavy rainfall that would cause inland flooding along with storm surge. And then they can also have additional impacts on our city and the infrastructure and the surrounding areas. They can cause power outages, we lose internet, water and sewerage pumping station issues that could result in a boil water advisory. We have flooding, of course, supply chain disruptions, and fuel shortages. So all of these things are things that, even if a storm isn't forecast to make landfall right next to us or on top of us, if we are in that cone of uncertainty, these are all factors that we are thinking about, because even if the exact landfall point isn't near us, these things could all impact us. Next slide, please. So as we're looking at a storm that's forming that we're potentially in the path of, we have several options for what we can do. The first is, do we close and shelter in place? And this means that we would transition to online or remote classes or cancel classes. We will cease all of our normal business operations, and we will shelter our on-campus residents in their residence halls or another building on campus that is designated as a shelter. If this is the decision that the university makes, it's because the expected impacts from the storm to New Orleans and the university are predicted to be pretty manageable, that we would be able to resume our normal operations within a pretty quick turnaround time. Our second option is to close and evacuate. If this is the route that we decide to go, it means that classes will be canceled, we will cease normal business operations, and that everyone must evacuate. There is no option with that. It is not an if and or but, must evacuate. The only people that will be allowed to stay on any of our campuses are designated essential personnel who are here to protect our assets. Everyone else, students, employees, has to leave. If this is the decision that's made, it's likely that we are going to expect impacts from the storm that are going to be pretty significant to the New Orleans area and to us, that would really emphasize some of those hazards that we talked about from the previous slide about some of those longer term effects, extended power outage, lots of supply chain interruptions and fuel shortages. Now, one thing to note, we as a university can declare a mandatory evacuation for the university population, even if the city of New Orleans does not declare a mandatory evacuation. However, if the city of New Orleans declares a mandatory evacuation, then we also have to declare one. If we decide that we are going to shelter in place or evacuate, either way, we will be running university shuttles from our campus to the airport so that if your student wants to evacuate, if we have decided to shelter in place, or if we are in an evacuation scenario, they will be able to get to the airport. And that's one piece that you don't have to worry about. For those, when we start running shuttles, the Tulane Shuttles and Transportation Office will send out information to students about how they can sign up for spots on buses at the various times that they start leaving. Our shuttles will start running usually about 3.5, 4 days before landfall until about 1 day before the storm is forecast to make landfall. Flights will typically still leave the New Orleans airport about 24 hours before projected landfall. Typically, most of the airlines send in extra planes so that they can help get as many people out, because we do have tourists, conventions, citizens who've lived here for a very long time and been through a lot of storms and don't want to stay. So they do send in extra planes to help depopulate the city. And then our third option really means that there's no storm coming our way. We do nothing. The storm forecast area doesn't include New Orleans, and we're not expecting any impacts. So we're all just going to cross our fingers that we don't wind up in that forecast area for this season. Next slide, please. So how do we make our decision? And deciding between sheltering in place and evacuating, there are a lot of things that go into that. So many of the factors that we're looking at are how big is the storm forecast to be when it makes landfall, and then when it starts moving inland. How fast is the storm moving, and is it projected to slow down before landfall, to speed up? Once it makes landfall, is it projected to slow down and stall, which then becomes a really big flooding risk? Or is it going to move very quickly when it then becomes more of a wind event? How much storm surge is predicted with the storm? What category of storm is it? The higher the category, truly just the bigger and more high-speed winds associated with the storm. And then where is the storm moving in relation to New Orleans? There really is no great side to be on for a hurricane, but if you had to pick a worst side, it's that northeastern side of the storm, or upper right quadrant, if you were to make it on a graph. So if we are in that upper right quadrant, we're looking at really high storm surge predictions. It's moving really slow and it's a big storm. Those are all factors that would really make us think about, do we want to evacuate? Because this is an old city and there's a lot of old infrastructure here. So we're not just thinking about what can we do on campus to keep ourselves going, but what is the city capable of doing? We try to make a decision and announce that decision between 2.5 to 3 days before projected landfall so that you still have time to implement your plans. As we are looking at all of these factors, we are having calls at least twice a day with the National Hurricane Center, AccuWeather, which we have a contract with year round, and then we contract with a local meteorologist as well to just give us as much information as they can. Our local meteorologist is fantastic because he has been in New Orleans for 25 years. He has been a meteorologist for 30 years. And so he really understands how storms impact our city. And the National Hurricane Center has gotten better and better with technology at how they can predict what storms are doing. So this is all stuff that, you know, as we are having multiple calls a day, we are looking at all of these factors and really thinking about how will this particular storm impact us, because no two storms are the same. So we can't say, well, what did storm last year do compared to the one the year before that, and hope that this one is the same or pray it's different depending on what they had happen. Next slide. So if we have decided that we are going to shelter in place, then this is really important for if your student lives on campus. Our residence halls and then select other buildings that we can designate as shelters maintain full power, including HVAC. That one's really important. We like having that air conditioning. Our on-campus students will also be provided with a 3-day supply of meals ready to eat, or MREs, which is non-perishable food. We've changed up what supplier we're going to use for this year. Donald and I got to be part of the taste testing for MREs about 2 months ago and had 4 different brands of macaroni and cheese. It was a blind tasting and everybody picked the same one for best mac and cheese. So it was actually, they don't sound great. They don't always bring the best image to people's minds, but these are good and, you know, in an emergency are great. In addition to that, to our MREs, it's not just meals. We also have snacks that we will provide that are non-perishable, because when we shelter in place, there is a certain point when your student will not be allowed to leave their residence hall or the building that we have told them to go to. This starts from when we start getting tropical storm force winds until after we have gone through and done our initial damage assessment. So this could be upwards of 24 hours. For Hurricane Ida, I believe, and Donald, correct me if I'm wrong, that it was about 30 hours before we let students leave their buildings.
Yeah, it was.
Okay. Yep. It's a nice long time. And during that time, we are also in that same lockdown period as our first responders on campus, our police and facilities. And so it's for everybody's safety that we do that. When we do a shelter in place, this also means that activities like the Riley Rec Center will be closed. So when we shelter, Riley becomes a shelter location for our essential employees who stay here to help with our life safety and protection of our physical assets. This group that's that essential group includes Tulane Police Department, facility services, members of student affairs, dining, and us. Next slide, please. So if your student lives off campus, which may not be this year, but next year or a few years down the road, this is really important for them. Students who live off campus will need to make sure that at their residence, they have bottled water, non-perishable food, flashlights, and batteries. We are not fans of candles because those can cause fires. And at a certain point, when you're out of wick, you're then out of light. They want to make sure that they have extra batteries, not just the ones that are in their flashlight. And all of their food and water, they need to make sure that they have enough to last at least 3 to 5 days per person in their house. And should they get pets when they move off campus, they need to include their pets in those counts. They also need to check with their landlords to see if their residence has a generator. And from our experience, most off-campus student housing does not. What preparatory steps the landlord is expecting them to take and what steps the landlord will be taking. Steps that the landlord might ask your student to take would include securing their garbage bins and recycle bins. If they have a porch, bringing in any patio furniture that they may have out there. And then if there are shutters on the home, closing those. And then they need to ask, what will the landlord be doing? This is also good for them to do so that they can let the landlord know if they are staying or if they are evacuating, so that if there is an issue, the landlord knows there are people trying to live there right then. If your off-campus student does not feel comfortable or safe sheltering in place at their off-campus residence, unfortunately, we just cannot guarantee that we will be able to accommodate them on campus. So this is something that, as when they move off campus, that you need to talk about with them of, if there is a storm and the university is going to shelter in place, do you want to go ahead and evacuate? Off-campus students also need to be prepared for the very high likelihood of losing power. With tropical storm and hurricane force winds, a loss of power is not uncommon, nor is it unexpected. Part of the charm of our really great city is its age, but with that age and history also comes an old city with an even older feeling infrastructure, which in New Orleans includes above ground power lines that tree limbs and or just entire trees can take down with one good gust of wind. So power losses following a storm can last anywhere from hours to days to weeks, depending on how widespread the issue is and how much damage there is to the energy infrastructure. So as they are preparing their emergency supplies, they need to keep that in mind. And, having flashlight and batteries on hand year round, not just during hurricane season, is very important, because we do sometimes lose power on beautiful cloudless days for no really apparent reason. Another issue that comes with our aged infrastructure in the city is an increased likelihood of problems with the city's pumping stations and sewerage stations. If the sewerage stations are compromised, not only will the city smell, but there is a chance that there could be a sewerage backup into people's homes through their toilets and tubs and sinks. So the other piece that goes with that is that to accompany the smell, if there's a sewerage issue, garbage pickup does not start immediately after a storm. There tends to be delays for days or weeks, and then the priorities become removing large debris and then getting back to normal pickup for household waste. So those are just things to keep in mind as your student decides if they're going to live off campus. Again, following a storm, the university will not immediately reopen, because we do have to do our damage assessments to make sure that campus itself is safe for people to walk around and to be on. So when a storm passes, that does not mean off-campus students should come running to campus, because we will not be ready for them at that point. They still need to wait to get an all clear message, which would go through EVERBRIDGE to them via text, email, and through that app. And for an email telling them, here are the buildings that will be open that you can come to. So next, Donald's going to talk to us about evacuating.
All right, evacuation. So what to take with you? So always plan to be gone for at least 5 days. Let your student know one of the things that they should have, and we don't have it on our list, have emergency cash with them just in case. It's not for a hurricane, it's not for a hurricane party. It is strictly for emergencies. What if we have a power outage prior to the storm, and they need to get gas? A lot of our pumps may be on generator power, but they may not have the network to actually run credit or debit cards. So this ensure that your student have emergency cash with them just in case. Once again, it's only for emergencies. Also have clothes and medication, any personal hygiene supplies that they may need. Last year, a student actually left a $5,000 medication in the student health refrigerator. Make sure your student, when they evacuate, bring all those items with them. If not, they will not be allowed back on campus to retrieve those items. Once again, once campus is closed, campus is closed. And if they are found back on campus, they could definitely see, they're definitely gonna have an appointment with student affairs and face probably some student conduct consequences. Other things to keep with them as well, their schoolwork. One thing we found we could do well is work remote. Just in case we're closed for a long period of time, make sure they have their laptop with them and also their books, just in case we have to transition from on ground to remote learning. Portable chargers, electronic devices and chargers. Make sure your student have a portable charger with them just in case. Last year during Ida, it took a young lady a few hours to walk to campus because her phone died. And I said, hey, what actually took you so long? She said, my phone died and I didn't know how to get here without my Google Maps. So make sure your students have something that they could charge their devices up with and keep their devices charged as well. As Meredith stated earlier, on a cloudless day, we could be without power. Last year, July, we went 32 hours with our downtown district without power. And this year in March, we went about 22 hours without power for our downtown district. So once again, just make sure they have portable chargers with them as well. Have them bring their important documentation with them. So their IDs, their splash card, their passport, their birth certificate, any important documentation they may have, bring that with them. Last year during Ida, a lot of students evacuated. One student left a $25,000 Rolex watch in their dorm room. They left a lot of valuables. Try and have your students take the important documents with them or any family heirlooms with them as well. Have them bring those items with them. Don't leave that in your dorm room. And also emergency contacts. Have the emergency contacts on a index card. I know all of us on this call know what an index card is. On one side, put their personal emergency contacts. On the other side, put their Tulane emergency contacts. So what if they're evacuating and they lose their phone, they drop their phone is stolen? Will they be able to utilize someone else's phone to call their emergency contact? It's just like with Meredith. The only thing I know about her number, it begins with 504 and 343. And that is it. That is all I know about her number, right? So if I need to call Meredith up for a emergency, I wouldn't be able to call her because I don't remember her number, because we're so conditioned to go into that person's name and pressing the green button. Make sure your student have an emergency contact list for different family members and also for Tulane University as well. Next slide, Penny. Also evacuating. Remember, your student evacuation plan should be submitted by July 15th. A lot of times with students, as they're arriving, their plan could be one thing, but when they get here, they meet friends. It could actually change. It's a living document, but this document has to be filled out by July 15th. Their personal evacuation plan, and you may say to yourself, well, hey, I'll just have my student evacuate with Tulane University. Your plan is plan A, our plan is plan Z. If you look at the picture, this was actually Katrina. Nothing changed from 2005 to 2022. If your student evacuate with us, they're going to go to the University of Alabama, Birmingham, which is going to be an 8-hour ride. They'll probably stop for snacks. The buses will have Wi-Fi, will have a restroom. But once they get to the University of Alabama, Birmingham, they're going to have the same setup. They may or may not have cots. That's why we say we want your student to evacuate. We want you to have your own personal plan for your student, whether it's to fly back home, to go with other students back home. We want them to have a plan. We want you to think of Tulane as a last resort, like all of your plans from A to Y failed, and all we have left is Z. Last year we evacuated some of our students to hotels downtown Houston. We were glad we had that partnership with them, but that is never going to happen again, especially as our COVID restrictions are being lessened throughout the nation. We want your plan, not saying to scare you, we want you to have your plan for your student. Think about Tulane as a plan of last resort. Once again, plans can change, but make sure you have a plan for your student and not to evacuate with us unless that student just can't evacuate with us. It's not going to be pretty. Because the one thing I don't want your student making TikToks about me and then you being worried about where your student is. It's not going to be luxury. Last year doing our evacuation, one student came up to our COO and asked, what are the accommodations? And he said AC. And he was right. It's definitely not going to be pretty. I'm not sure if any of you ever evacuated before, but this is the setup. How miserable will your student be in this? You know, it's going to be horrible. Once again, have a plan for your student. Your plans can change throughout the semester. By the time your student arrives, the plan can change as well. We just want you to have a plan for your student. Think about Tulane University as a plan, as a last resort. Think of it as a Red Cross shelter. This is what your student will probably be in at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. The same setup, no different. So once again, have a plan for your student.
And Donald, I'm going to interrupt you real fast, if you don't mind. When I was an undergrad, we evacuated twice when I was an undergraduate. And the first time, my plan was to go home to Houston, and I was a sophomore, so I had a car here. And I asked one of my roommates, what's your plan? And they said, I think I'm going to fly home or go with the university. And I said, well, I have extra seats in my car. Why don't you come with me? And before I knew it, I was calling my mother to tell her that 9 friends and I would be coming to Houston, that we had 3 cars and we were going to caravan. And, you know, the 9 people that went with me, none of their plans were to go with me initially, but plans do change. My mother asked me why 9, and I said, you always said to bring friends home. She didn't make it quite that broad going forward, but we had a great hurricane in Houston and watched Hurricane Ivan miss New Orleans, which we were all very happy about. So plans can change, and your student will meet other students, some who may have cars, some who are from the area, and they can go with those folks if we need to evacuate.
Thank you, Meredith. I love hearing that story. Next slide, Penny. What is your role? Remember that evacuation plan for your student that is required by July 15th. If the university is announcing a closure, it is okay to pull your student out early to evacuate home. Just make sure they communicate with their professor. Just because they're going home doesn't mean schoolwork stops. Make sure they communicate with their professors. We don't want them to get any failing grades, so make sure they communicate with their professors if they are going to leave campus early. Same thing, it's okay to evacuate your students to the university decides to shelter in place, you know. Have a plan for your student. I can't stress that enough. We just want you to basically have a plan for your student. Also, renters insurance or homeowners insurance. One thing we found through IDA, even with my intern, he had his room covered under his parents' homeowners insurance, but the deductible was so high. But what we found is great to have renters insurance for your student, just in case their belongings within their dorm room does get damaged. And the link that's below, it's a great website. They have great rates as well, very affordable rates, and it's better than having homeowners insurance. Going through your own personal homeowners insurance. Have your students go to the college student insurance website and sign them up for renters insurance. It is definitely cheap and worth it. Next slide, Penny. Your role in developing your student's personal evacuation plan. Think about where would that student go? Will they evacuate with Meredith? Will they go to the University of Alabama with Donald? Are they going to evacuate with Penny? You know, think about that. When will your student make that decision to stay or leave? Make it early. One thing with Tulane University, we love to communicate. We love to communicate. Have a trigger for your student. Reach out to us as well. We're going to have our information at the end of the slide deck, but definitely reach out if you have any questions. How would they leave the city? Rail and bus transportation will probably not be available because the city utilizes those resources for a mandatory evacuation to get members of the city evacuated out. Who's your student designated out-of-town contacts? It may be, Uncle Travis in Texas. It could be Uncle Stephen in Covington. Who is your student's closest out-of-town contact, family member or emergency contact that's close by that they can call? If your student does evacuate, make sure they communicate with you or with that family member, that emergency contact family member, to let them know where they're going, when they're leaving, and just randomly and continue to check in with them as they evacuate out of the city. We are talking about this, whether on campus or off campus. Review your family's homeowners insurance coverage or secure separate property renters insurance for your student. Definitely go the renters insurance route. It is definitely cheap and affordable and worth it. Next slide. All right, your role, read the university announcements. We're going to be posting to different social media sites, and also watch local news. Watch local news, family. Do not watch the Weather Channel. They're going to show you the worst of the worst. WWL, Fox 8, WDSU, they even have apps. The one thing I will tell you, don't sign up for their alerts. Do not sign up for any of their alerts because they will bug you about anything going on in New Orleans. If there's an emergency going on, weather, you want to keep an eye on it. We love WWL, Fox, WDSU. These are all the folks that we look at for weather in conjunction with our other weather partners as well. Once again, do not look at the Weather Channel. If you want update information about local weather, talk to your local folks. They have great apps. Every morning, I just have my iPad looking at the news and I even watch it on TV. You can have it right there at the palm of your hand. And the other thing, remind your students to check their email. We send a lot of great information. Just remind your students to check their email whenever there's any activity in the Gulf, or if we're monitoring something in the Atlantic as well. Next slide. Also, we have NOLA Ready. This is NOLA Ready Alerts. Once again, parents, do not sign up for NOLA Ready Alerts. Have your student do it. They will see NOLA Ready send alerts for every little thing. It's good for your students. It's bad for the parents. I had one parent we spoke to about a month ago. She's like, those alerts just stress me out because they send alerts for the city. Once again, follow WWL, WDSU, and Fox 8. NOLA Ready, have your students sign up for those alerts. And parents, get a gameplan.org. Definitely look at this website. This is everything emergency for the state of Louisiana and all 64 parishes. It shows evacuation routes, how to create a plan. It just has a lot of great resources for the state of Louisiana. And I'll pass it back to Meredith.
All right, next slide. So following a storm, and we've given you a lot about what to do pre-storm, during the storm. So now we're post-storm. It's really critical that your students follow all the instructions from Tulane administration. These will all be sent through their Tulane email, and then we'll also do follow-ups through their TU alerts through EVERBRIDGE. So we'll send an email, a text message linking to the information that the administration sent out. And then this will all, of course, get posted on that emergency webpage. Students should not return to any of the campus buildings or wander out of the building they have sheltered in until they are expressly told that they may do so by Tulane administration. Their roommate saying it looks like it's cool and we can go outside, that is not Tulane administration. They should not follow that person's advice. Just because some of our buildings may also have power does not mean that they are safe to occupy yet. We still need to do that damage assessment. And your students should also be prepared to attend classes remotely for multiple days or longer post-storm, because while on campus, all of our residence halls have full generator backup. So they have power, they have AC, they'll keep their internet. Our dining hall will keep its power, it's on its own generator. Same for the student center, the Lavin Burnick Center. Those buildings will keep power, but that's just those buildings. It doesn't include the surrounding area where our faculty live and our staff. So, classes may resume online before we can bring people back to start teaching in person. So if they have evacuated, remind them that they need to take what they need to do their coursework. Especially if they evacuate on a Friday or Saturday and think they're gone for the weekend, they need to be planning for that next week and the week after, just in case. So next slide. So we have been giving y'all a ton of information, and Penny, at this time, we're ready to start answering any questions that have come in.
Okay, so our first question is an important one that we kind of anticipated, because we need to make sure that everybody understands the difference between last year and what might happen in the future. So this parent said, I might have missed this, but what happens when there's a severe hurricane and you have to take a bus to a different city? I thought this is what happened last year, but I have a first-year student. So could you just repeat what you all said earlier about
Yes.
that
Yeah.
situation?
So normally, if we're going to evacuate, we prefer to do it before a storm hits. However, Ida, everything going into Ida from our forecast and what we were anticipating looked like we'd be able to shelter in place. One thing that Ida did that nobody anticipated was she knocked one of the Entergy transformers completely off its base and into the Mississippi River. And that took out the entire city of New Orleans power grid. There was no power anywhere. And Entergy, I believe their word was a catastrophic failure, which pretty much summed that one up pretty nice and neatly in my mind. And they anticipated that it would be 3 to 4 weeks before there was power restored to the city. And so when we knew that we could not keep students on campus because that was not in the best interest for them. It's a life safety issue. And so that is why we evacuated students to Houston, where there's 2 large airports, so that they could start flying out. If we decide to evacuate before a storm, which is our preference, that's when we will put them on buses to go up to the University of Alabama at Birmingham, where they will enjoy a shelter on the basketball arena floor with however many of their classmates, schoolmates decide to also evacuate. So I believe for Katrina, about 700 students evacuated, and we are anticipating that that number probably isn't decreasing. So it will be tight quarters with their new 700 or so best friends if they go with us.
But I will say that it's also the experience with that has taught us to explain how to evacuate better, because we really do want to reduce that number as much as possible for the management of it, for students' comfort and safety and all those things. So we really want to have that number be as small as possible, quite frankly, so that everybody can have a better experience, as many as you can. So that's why we've been doing these parent webinars for all this time, to just inform you better well in advance, when you can think through something clearly and you're not under the gun to kind of do this quickly and under pressure. So the next couple of questions, so there was a question about generators, and you explained that the residence halls have generator power. So there are a couple of questions about how is this information presented to the students? So could you speak to that?
Yes. On move-in nights, I will speak to all incoming freshmen. Just how I'm speaking with you all, I will have them in person this year, myself, Tulane Police Department, and Student Affairs, and I'm going to go through hurricane and also active shooter with your student. Tulane Police Department will go through safety procedures around campus, and also for the city of New Orleans, how to navigate the city. But we will have an opportunity to speak to all incoming freshmen move-in nights.
You all also have sent information to the students as well. Isn't that correct, Meredith? Something?
It is. We have a mailer that will be going to all students' permanent mailing addresses, and we are getting it prepped to go out at the end of this week. And it will have general safety information, but also hurricane preparedness information.
So how do they submit that plan? So that's in Gibson, is that right? So if you
Correct.
could just
That's correct.
explain that again. So the students log into their Gibson portal. As Donald said, parents should not be logging into that. I happen to know that some of you have been using your students' login. That's really not allowed. And understand that your student can change their password at any time that they want. But it's also a security issue that password goes to a lot of different systems at Tulane. So we really don't, the students are, it's really the contract between the university and them to maintain the security of their password, their login. So you can sit down with them, have them log in and go through the steps to outline the student's plan. Let's see. The emergency phone numbers that students should have. So I'll put those in the chat in a second while we're doing some other things. There are a couple of different, there's the emergency number for Tulane University Police Department. This one will be on their ID card. That's 504-865-5911. And I'll put this in the chat in a moment. And then the non-emergency number for Tulane Police Department is 504-865-5381.
And we have our own dispatchers separate from the city of New Orleans that are for the Tulane Police Department. So when they call, they will get a Tulane dispatcher. And when they get their splash card, all they have to do is flip it over and all those numbers are on the back right there for them for easy reference.
Let's see. Here's a question. What size bag do you suggest that students have ready to go if they're evacuating with Tulane? Is a regular size suitcase too large? What do you recommend?
Regular size suitcase isn't too large. Just like boarding an airplane, just have one suitcase and one carry-on.
And so that's what they would, yeah, like something they can hold on their lap. And then there's on the buses that we use, there's a luggage compartment. I'll just mention that if they're evacuating, they'll also be taking some bedding, correct, Meredith and Donald?
If they are evacuating with us, Donald, do you want to finish that or do you want me to?
Yeah, I was going to say linen is sometimes available, sometimes it's not. One thing I always recommend, your student have a sleeping bag and also bring their own linen. There's nothing like having your own linen. Even when I travel to hotels, I bring my own linen and towels.
And I think it could be useful to have something that is really flat, you know, like they can store it in their room, like a duffel bag or something that doesn't take up a lot of space, but then they can stuff a lot of things into. So they could fold up sheets and, you know, a blanket to have basic linen if that's needed when they're going, you know, and put the other things in there. So those are things you might want to think about this summer as you're helping them kind of prepare what they're going to pack to bring to campus. So what is the recommendation regarding water and other hurricane supplies that the students should have in their freshman residence hall room? So Tulane will provide bottled water.
If we go into a boil water advisory.
Right.
If we are not in a boil water advisory, then tap water is safe to drink. But once we go into that boil water advisory, which means that the city's water purification plant has lost pressure for a certain number of minutes and has gone beneath a certain pressure, then we're in a boil water advisory for at least 24 hours. That's how long it takes to run the test at the state to see if the water is clear. Safe to drink, not clear. It's always clear. So if we are in a boil water advisory, we provide bottled water to all of the residence halls and the dining facility. But otherwise, you know, if they don't want to drink tap water, then they should do, it's not Kentwood, it's Mountain Springs, I think is the water company that they can do delivery service from, or just have their own bottled water. And then I would recommend any snacks that they prefer, that they just keep on hand.
So I'm gonna ask a couple more questions because I'm gonna try to think like this parent might be asking. Do you think, Meredith, that students should sort of always have some bottled water and snacks sort of on supply in their room? So that, I mean, if they're getting meals ready to eat, if they're sheltering in place, they would also be given.
They'll
water.
be given some snacks, but like my favorite snack is Cheez-Its, just in case anyone's wondering. And we do not have Cheez-Its in our emergency supplies. So I go to Costco and buy the big box that has, 75 individually snack size Cheez-Its and bring that with me for when I show up to stay on campus for our hurricanes.
Water would be provided with the MREs, right?
Only if we are in a boil water. So we will
Okay.
have water staged, but it will not be distributed until we go, if we go into a boil water advisory. With Ida, we didn't go into a boil water advisory, but I believe with Zeta in 2020, we did. So
So
that's the
if you
difference
wanted to-
there.
Yeah, so if the families wanted to feel like you've kind of left your student prepared when you move them in, then you may want to just, make sure they've got a couple of gallons of water they can just kind of put in the back of their closet or something just to have on hand. Like those of us who live here do that kind of thing once it gets to June.
Yes.
We just kind of go ahead and stock up, we've got extra water, we've got extra snacks and non-perishable food.
And
So,
one thing I would say for that is with the meals ready to eat, it just comes in a little pouch of some sort, some of them. And so making sure that your student has, a plate, a bowl, some silverware that they can use in their room, because all residence hall rooms on campus have a microwave and a mini fridge. And because the residence halls maintain power, they can still heat things up or keep things cool. So just having those will make that a little bit easier for them, I believe.
let's see here. So a parent asked just to confirm, even if we're sheltering in place, if Tulane chooses to shelter in place, students can evacuate if they and your family decide that's the best option for you all. So, so yes, you can make that decision. And what we've said is just that just the students should just communicate with their professor and let them know that they're going to do that. And because sometimes your family may decide the best way to get our student evacuated is that we might have to make that call before Tulane does. And so we're pretty understanding about that. I think that it's just one of those things that flexibility can be offered if there's good communication from the student to the people they're responsible to, which are their professors. So another question is renter's insurance good or needed for on-campus housing? And so, yes, they do really, we do really recommend that because Tulane's not responsible for some types of damage that might occur. And it's just really smart to do that. And so if your homeowner's insurance doesn't cover that, or there's, like Donald said, there's a really high deductible, that link that we provided goes to a company that really offers some really good products. It even covers, at least one of the plans even covers things like just lost electronics, like their phones or their laptop or something. So it's really worth looking at. And I will also put information about that in the upcoming parent e-newsletter. So the question is, tell us again, what happens once you get to Alabama? How do students get to the airport and to get home from Alabama?
So once we get to Alabama, there is a great airport there, and we will run shuttles to that airport as well.
So if they already submitted an evacuation plan, that is to evacuate with Tulane, but when the time comes, their student has the option to fly home or leave by car with another student, what do they do? Who and how do they do that notification of a change in their plan?
So your student can go into their Gibson profile and make the update in that plan at any time. They could do it today. If your student also lives on campus, then housing will send them instructions about how to make sure that they are updating housing on what their plan is. So especially if we are in a mandatory evacuation, they will send a code to students, usually through a QR code, for a form to fill out with that information of who they're going with, where are they going, how are they getting there.
The next question is, if we choose to fly our student out, what information do we give to the airport about our student? Do we book a round trip or one way?
So for these, make sure that they have a ticket before they get, if they're going to take one of the shuttles that we are running to the airport, make sure they have a ticket before they get to the airport. And then round trip is a little bit hard unless you can do a refundable ticket that you can change. So it may be better to do a one-way, just to wait and see, what does the storm do? What does our damage assessment reveal? And when do we say students can start returning?
And also have your student get to the airport early as well. New Orleans does have a lot of conventions here, and everyone's going to be trying to fly out. A lot of people think the airport is going to close, but the airport isn't going to close until they start filling those, until it's unsafe to fly. That's when they'll stop having planes fly out.
And Meredith and Donald, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't there some situations when the airport wouldn't even let you in if you didn't already have proof of a flight? Like, they don't want you to go to the airport and try to book it at the counter.
Correct. That's the last time that I remember them doing that, and Donald, correct me if my memory is incorrect, was when the city issued a mandatory evacuation. But it is highly encouraged because the ticket counters at the airlines will all be overrun with people. So having that online ticket that you can just show your boarding pass from your phone will make a world of difference.
And actually, it's not a bad idea if they, if they're really doing this in advance and everything, to even print out their boarding pass before they go. So they can print that from a campus printing station, so they have it on their phone and printed, just in case. You wouldn't want at the last minute for them to not be able to find that on their phone, or for their battery to die or whatever. So having sort of backups is really smart and important. Let's see. And so the shuttles to the airport are provided for the students who live on campus but don't have cars, or even if they had a car and they're going to leave that here, but they want that, they want that convenience being offered. So the shuttles are out to the airport are also for the students who live off campus. Like, that's just a service that we provide at that time, just to help students to facilitate that evacuation, for them to get out of town. Another question is, I saw that the school offers a bottled water service for dorm rooms. Is this because of the need to boil water alerts, or is it just a preference? So it really is a preference. We have tap water. If we were in a boil water situation, because something is wrong with the tap water and the water lines, and we would be providing water from the store of water that our emergency management folks have. So it's a preference. It's definitely not a there's New Orleans tap water is fine to drink under all the normal circumstances. If the student evacuates with the university, can a family member then pick them up? So if you all could speak to that part of it.
Yes.
And so, sometimes that's what you might do. If your student is going to evacuate with the campus, then it might be that you have, you've got a relative who could drive in and get them from University of Alabama, so that they could get to a more comfortable spot, or you can fly them from there, or you can drive in and get them. So yes, you can pick them up. It'll just be, they'll need to alert the folks who are managing the evacuation spot that they are leaving, just so that they can keep count of everybody. That's important to us. Let's see. Will any residence halls move the students to other housing facilities? If so, which ones? So this is more about
situation dependent. Yes. So with Zeta in 2020 and these 6 storms that we prepared for, that we were in the cone of uncertainty for preceding Zeta in 2020, we did not need to move any residents from any of their existing residence halls. All of them were perfectly fine. They were all built, they're built for code. And with Ida, we did move the residents out of 4 residence halls because of a crane that was sitting in the middle of the 4 of them at the site of a new residence hall that is being built. And while we had all of the engineering reports that, gave us great comfort that the crane was not going to, the top of it wasn't going to fly off, it wasn't going to fall, that it would be, as solid as ever. Just out of an abundance of caution, we moved the students from those 4 buildings around it to the LBC and the commons to interior spaces within those two buildings, so that they would not, look out and see this crane. It was put in what's called weather vane mode, so it'll just spin at the top with the wind. It moved about 10 degrees during the entire storm. So
next question. You mentioned students who live off campus are on their own to provide their own hurricane evacuation or shelter in place plan. How many years does Tulane provide housing for students who want to remain on campus? So our students are required to live on campus for their first and second years. And then we do not have enough housing for students to live here all 4 years. So that's, it's kind of depended in the last few years on the size of the first year classes, and then that, how many become sophomores. We definitely have encouraged students as they are sophomores to start planning and looking for off-campus housing for their junior and senior years. We do have a residence hall that's, under construction right now. So that may change things, the dynamics and the capacity, a year from now or so. But so that's something to pay attention to as your student gets into their sophomore year, to be thinking about that. And we offer parent webinars about that whole off-campus housing search as well. So let's see, next question. How close to landfall does the airport usually fly, or when does the airport typically close? You mentioned this, Donald, but this person might have missed that. You can repeat that for us.
Yes, the airport will stay open until they start feeling hurricane force winds, tropical force winds, and it's unsafe to fly.
So another question, let's see. What can we expect if we need to make airline reservations in an evacuation for our student? Do the airlines make adjustments for all the unknowns, like return date? So I don't know that they would necessarily adjust for return dates, but like Meredith said, they will increase some capacity, fly planes in here. And then they're also trying to, when it gets closer to time, they're trying to fly all their planes out of New Orleans so they're not in harm's way. So that, increases some of that capacity. But it's probably smart in terms of the return to try to find something that's flexible. Wouldn't you say, Meredith and Donald, that you've got, like low change fees or no change fees, or, those kinds of things for that return? Because we can't always predict in advance, when that would be. We're getting past 7. So I'm going to look for a couple of last questions. And then I'll just remind everybody that we will send an email to everyone who registered for tonight's webinar to you with a PDF of the slides so that you can have this information. And I will try to send that out as fast as possible, along with the link to the video of the webinar. And I'll tell you, I might send you 2 emails. Sometimes it takes a while for us to get the video back. So I might send the slides and those important numbers that we mentioned to you first in an email, and then send you a second email with the webinar link to the recording.
Penny, if you'll advance one slide, our contact information is up.
Yes.
In case anyone thinks of questions when they're watching this webinar again later, or didn't have a chance to put it into the Q&A.
One person had asked about, they heard about some thefts that happened last year in the residence halls. And so that is, certainly not something that we wanted to happen or planned for, but that did become something of an issue. So that it's something that we definitely, it's another reason, just because those kind of things could happen at any time, that we recommend the property insurance. And so do look into that, that company that we mentioned. It's just a really good thing to do. It's also, I'll say something else too, that we also discourage students from bringing family heirlooms to campus and expensive jewelry. So, really talk with your student about whether or not it's really wise to kind of leave home with that when, they've got to be very, very careful about that kind of thing. And what we find is that oftentimes, their students can leave their rooms unattended. They need to adopt the habit of always locking their room door, anytime that they kind of just step out into the hallway and go to the restroom, or they might get sidetracked and meet a friend and then they don't come back to their room for an hour or two. And so it's just a new mindset to get in. When they walk out of their bedroom at home, they're still inside their house. That's different than when they are in a community situation, with residence halls. So have them really think about what kinds of things, are so valuable. They really ought to just stay at home, that they're not really necessary to be with them here at the university while they're here studying. So give that some thought. And let's see, I think that will close now.